Keep it safe!
No return to the back streets! Fight the Alton bill!
If this bill goes through, I will be seeing 10 to 12 women a month that I will have to say to them, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to continue this pregnancy because there is nothing that we can do for you legally. Now, I have no doubt that some of those women will actually continue their pregnancies and suffer the burden financially and emotionally in every other way of another child. But I'm also equally sure that some of those women will not be able to stand that strain and they will seek help in the back streets. It's in direct relation to your social position. If you had enough money, you could go to Harley Street and fix up some kind of a safe, clean abortion. There used to be about 9,000 legal abortions done before 67. If you could afford the equivalent of about £2,000 today, I don't think there's many women here who could afford £2,000 just like that. I don't think there's many women in Birmingham or Coventry. Only a very small percentage of the population have got that kind of ready money. If you weren't one of those women before 67, then you face the threat of death by septicemia or by bleeding to death. If you manage to get to a backstreet abortionist, or you actually face the thought of having to do it yourself with a bicycle spoke, with a knitting needle, or by using one of the many contraptions which were freely advertised at the time. I don't think there's many women here today who would happily contemplate the idea of having to do that to themselves. In the 1930s, about 500 women a year died as a result of illegal abortions. By the 50s, that had gone down to 40 to 50 women a year. They're not going to stop with 24 weeks if they manage to get that as a limit. Just one little example of what happened in Coventry recently. We put on a clinic after New Year's Day to give the morning after pill to women. That's the way that you actually prevent abortion, by increasing National Health Service resources for women to get access to family planning. The Tory government is closing down family planning clinics up and down Britain, and people like David Alton support that.
It's the 9th time in 21 years that the 67 Abortion Act will be under attack. As Maureen has said, there were abortions before 1967. In 1961, 10,000 women paid for private treatment. But for thousands of working class women, only self-inducement on a back street was the alternative that they had. The introduction of safe, legal abortion on the NHS was part of a package of gains for working class women, such as the Sex Discrimination Act and Equal Pay, which were products both of the years of economic boom and the growing involvement of women workers in the trade union movement. But we're now in the 80s and the 90s, the years of recession, when the stock exchange crash has showed that within a year or so there's going to be a major recession, if not a slump, in this country. And therefore the reverse takes place. The position of women workers is under attack, not only with the cuts in NHS, with social service provisions, but with part-time wages and conditions and unemployment itself. The Tories cloud this issue with morality. They talk about the viability of the fetus. It's pure hypocrisy. There are children in the Birmingham Children's Hospital who are only days old, who are dying because of the lack of NHS facilities by this Tory government. Now, nobody wants late abortions, least of all the women who have to undergo them. But it's not a question of whether or not there's going to be late abortions, but whether or not those abortions are legal and safe, or whether Alton succeeds in criminalising those women through the bill he brings in on Friday. Many of the late abortions are because of the inadequate NHS facilities, for example in this region, and by unsympathetic doctors and those who advise women. Instead, on Friday, of the House of Commons debating the reduction of facilities under the 67 Act, what we ought to be talking about is free contraception and the extension of youth advisory services, of free and immediate pregnancy testing, of better sex education in the schools, and of removing the power of doctors to delay or prevent women from having an abortion. Yes, there ought to be advice from medical and social experts to women, but when the decision is taken, it ought to be that woman's alone. Now, Alton's bill does not include any exemptions for women who have a fetus that has severe abnormalities. There's a test called amniocentesis, which can only be done at 18 weeks. The results take some 3 or 4 weeks later to come through to detect such things as Down syndrome. That has devastating results if that test is to be denied to women, which is why this morning MenCap have written to me, the national charity for the mentally and physically disabled children and their parents, have written to me this morning and asked me to oppose Alton's bill. It's true, there are alternatives being developed. There's a thing called chlorian villus sampling, which can detect abnormalities as early as 8 or 10 weeks. But Guy's Hospital in London, which is doing research into that new form of testing, needs £32,000 this year to keep that research going, and the Tories have refused Guy's Hospital that money. Now, in any event, the Tories who support Alton say that any abortion on the basis of severe abnormalities is discrimination against disabled people. 52 Tory MPs last week signed an advert, a 2-page advert sponsored by Spock in the national newspapers, calling for opposition and to abortion and to support for Alton. 38 of those Tory MPs were present in the House of Commons on Tuesday night, when after 3 months of campaigning, I moved an amendment to the Social Security Act to give all families with children under the age of 2 with severe physical or mental disabilities the same £30 allowance they would get each week when they reach the age of 2. Every one of those Tory MPs who prattle on about the severe disabilities not being a clause or not being a grounds for an abortion to take place, including Hargreaves of Hall Green in Birmingham, every one of those Tory MPs voted against those families getting that money for the under 2 severely disabled, physically or mentally disabled child. The Tories only care about disabled children until they're born, and then they don't give a damn.
And I think it is an insult of David Alton to try and tell women who have gone through or are likely to go through the experience of pregnancy and childbirth the significance of that picture. Because for those of us who know what it is like, we know that it is not something like an appendix that we have inside us here. We know that is potential human life. But when I saw that picture, it was in a book that was all about the process of getting pregnant and having a child. And it was within the context of a mother. Now, what seems to me significant about the way that this picture has been used by David Alton and his supporters is that that fetus does not have a mother. And we know from the experience of many other countries around the world where abortion is illegal or restricted, that women will turn to backstreet abortionists, they will turn to their own methods, and they will use the darning needles, the crochet hooks, the knitting needles, the potassium permanganate crystals that cause ulcers and bleeding. They'll turn to the illegal abortionists who use the proper methods but without anaesthetics, can you believe it, in unhygienic conditions, causing death and injury. And I think we have to remind people very forcibly that that is the alternative that Alton is suggesting. His claim that he is going to be reducing the number of abortions is nonsense. He will only be reducing the number of legal abortions. What we will see is an increase in the number of illegal, botched, backstreet, dangerous and fatal operations carried out. Now, if Alton was really concerned about late abortions, then he would be looking at something else other than what he is doing. He would be looking at better sex education and counselling, because 50% of abortions over 18 weeks are carried out on young girls who are too frightened to admit that they are pregnant or to tell people that they are pregnant. He would be looking at better NHS facilities, because 20% of late abortions are carried out on women who actually went to their doctor early, but they were then faced with delays in the health service. And if he really wanted to improve the situation, then he might try and learn from some other places where they've done things just a bit better than we have. And if he looked to Sweden, for example.
I don't need normally speeches written for me, but I believe this is an issue about which women should have the choice, women should make the decisions, and women should make the speeches. And men's role is to listen and to support. And you know, it's a shame that David Alton doesn't think along the same lines. Because if he did, I've no doubt that we wouldn't need to be here today fighting his anti-woman bill. So I intend to read you a speech from a woman trade unionist. And this is what the woman trade unionist would wish me to say. She says, don't tell them that 80% of the women in 1985 had them on the grounds of risk to physical or mental health of the woman. She said, don't tell them that 16% of the women who had abortions past that date had them on the grounds of risk of fetal abnormality. She said, because you will all know that. Instead, tell them quite simply this, and this is why she's not here today in answer to the question, that as a woman who once had an abortion, and albeit some 18 years ago, she can still remember the date, of course. And as a woman, and all women who have been in a similar position, they will know the situation. She believes that the current abortion legislation generally works well. It allows 3 people only to be involved in the decision with regard to time limits, because there are those people as follows. First of all, the woman herself. And although David Alton would have us believe that she needn't be the prime person involved, and the 2 doctors, whose job it is, after all, to make the decisions with regard to all of the facts. She will always remember the fear and anguish she suffered in making that very personal decision. And now, as a 37-year-old woman with 2 lovely children, she knows the anguish she would suffer again should she ever have to make the decision about a further pregnancy.